Hello. In this episode, we'll be looking at the third link, which is consciousness, the third link of Paticca Samuppada. Consciousness can be a difficult thing to get your head around. In science, they talk about the hard problem of consciousness, the hard problem of trying to accurately define, not just define it, but understand how it occurs and why it occurs. And it can be a bit messy if you ask the question, what is consciousness? Well, for a Buddhist practitioner, for a practitioner of Vipassana meditation, it is enough to know that consciousness is knowing an object. If that object is a sight, a visual object, we call it seeing. If it's a sound, we call it hearing. If it's a mental object, then a bit tangly, we don't have anything quite suitable or snappy in the English language, but you can call it mind consciousness. So consciousness is that aspect of mind which knows an object. And so for Vipassana meditators, that's enough of a definition. If somebody then starts saying, yes, but what is it? Then they're just simply reiterating the same question born of doubt, trying to answer an impossible question. It's not so much that following this way will answer the question of what is consciousness. What is it to be conscious? It's rather that in the last analysis you see that the question is born of doubt. It's born of not knowing, not understanding the true nature of reality. And as one finally transcends the wheel of Paticca Samuppada through understanding this whole process, one finds that the question just drops away. The way I like to put it is that it's not so much that the mystery of existence is solved, it is rather that you just abandon yourself to the great mystery. So it retains its mystery. The mystery just goes on forever. What is consciousness? What is consciousness? But we can certainly talk about what its characteristics are. And I think this is a really, really healthy conversation to have, because I think there is a lot of confusion about the nature of consciousness in the world, not unsurprisingly. So for most people, they just view consciousness as a kind of single enduring entity. We talk about ourselves being conscious. So it's this sort of amorphous stuff that's always there. It isn't viewed as a changing, momentary, changing phenomena. It's assumed to be unchanging. And even people on spiritual paths, certainly people who get into concentrated states, still fall into the error of believing that consciousness passes through time. But it is amorphous. It's very difficult to define. It's very difficult to locate what it is. And I think part of the problem is just the nature of concepts. All concepts have the tendency to reinforce the misperception of permanence. We say a hat, a tree, a cat, consciousness. The words themselves do not have any temporal aspect to them at all. They're just unending, conceptually unending. A tree is a tree. It's not there's no mention of the fact that it arises and passes away, that it's finite. Cat, we don't think of. So when the cat dies, we're sad, which is perfectly reasonable, because And even when the cat is dead, we're still using it in the present tense. The cat is dead. So with consciousness, which is even has an even shorter lifespan than the cat, in ultimate terms, consciousness arises and passes away. It does not pass through time. There are just a succession of moments of consciousness. But because consciousness isn't very well defined, we tend, and there is no mindful observation and investigation of what's actually going on, we tend to fall into the trap of believing that consciousness is unending, that consciousness is the self, so the consciousness is identical with the self. Consciousness is located within the self, so my head, or the self is located in consciousness. So a lot of people who get concentrated might fall into that trap of believing that concentration is infinite and that we operate within consciousness. That's a conceit. Or that self is the owner of consciousness. All of those are conceits. It's not the case, any of them, in actual fact. And the whole purpose of coming to understand Paticca Samuppada is to realise that consciousness is not nibbana. Nibbana transcends consciousness. So, in order to help with the discovery that consciousness is actually momentary, it helps to define consciousness. Now, saying consciousness is a knowing of an object isn't quite enough. It's helpful to define the objects. So, as I said before, you can define them simply. The Abhidhamma, the higher teaching of Buddhism, you can go into as much definition as you like. You can reduce different types of consciousness down into 89 or 121 different types if you want to go down that route. I've explored it to a certain extent and it is very interesting, and you get into things like the course of cognition, and it's absolutely fascinating. Abhidhamma, for some people, it's absolutely fascinating, but it's not for everyone. And in order to successfully navigate the Vipassana insights, it's not necessary to have that degree of definition. Having 7 types of consciousness that you can delineate in your experience will do the job. So you can delineate different types of consciousness by what object that they take. So visual objects for seeing, sounds for hearing, tastes for tasting, smells for smelling, body contacts, body sensations for body consciousness or touch, and then mental objects for mind consciousness. So that's being aware of a thought, a perception, a feeling, and so forth. And there is a 7th type of consciousness, which in the books is called mind consciousness element. And that is where consciousness takes a prior moment of consciousness itself as its object. And that's very useful when we're meditating, because there is always this conceit that I am the conscious witness behind even a thought, behind even a feeling, behind a perception. And the recognition that there is actually a moment of consciousness which takes a prior moment of consciousness as its object then shows you that assumption of something behind experience is itself false, that it's just a subsequent moment of experience that arises due to conditions and passes away. So for people practicing Vipassana meditation, those 7 kinds of consciousness, you'll see so much. And one of the things that you see when you start to get properly calm and you start really paying attention to your experience is that when there is seeing, There is no hearing, no tasting, no touching, no smelling, no other kind of consciousness arising parallel with it. There is a moment of seeing, and then there is the moment of knowing of seeing, and they arise and they pass away. So there's the object, and then there's the knowing of the object. They arise as a pair. Then there is the knowing of the prior moment of knowing. Those arise as a pair and cease as a pair. And when you're aware of one object, nothing else in the... Sorry, when there is consciousness of one object, there is nothing else in the universe. There is no universe. There is just the arising of the object and the knowing of it, and the ceasing of the object and the knowing of it. It happens very quickly, but like I say, if you get concentrated and you observe closely, it becomes blatantly obvious that actually you do not experience more than one sense, more than one moment of consciousness at any given moment. And it is all being weaved together to make a comprehensive whole. The conventional reality as we ordinarily know and understand it, that is this mysterious process of conditionality at work, weaving it, mind and body together. So consciousness is listed before the arising of mind and body, which I think is actually incredibly deep, and of course runs against the whole notion that consciousness is originated entirely through materiality. Obviously, mind and body have to be present for consciousness to arise, but there was prior consciousness which was the condition for mind and body arising, and that condition is the need for us to experience the results of our actions. So because there has to be resultant consciousness, there therefore has to be a mind and body, there therefore has to be the six sense bases, then you get the coming together of the object, the sense base, and consciousness, and we call that sense contact. And the sense contact gives rise to the feeling gives rise to the craving for life to be different than it is. And why it's so important to be mindful of the arising and passing away of consciousness is that it robs you of the illusion and the conceit that I am, there is a me behind experience, which is separate from experience, which is enduring through time. On the conventional level, that's fine, that's how we just work out our lives. But in terms of ultimate experience, no such entity behind experience can be found. And yet, consciousness is fully and completely explained and understood for what it really is. So yeah. Appreciate that. That's a hell of a topic. Honestly, it amazes me that I sit here and talk about the nature of consciousness. But for anyone who practices mindfulness properly and enters into the proper observation of the transient nature of consciousness and the conditioned nature of consciousness, seeing how consciousness is arising, a moment of consciousness is arising out of conditions. It arises, it knows an object, it ceases. This knowledge is available to absolutely everyone. You don't have to be a philosopher, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a psychologist, you don't have to be clever, you just have to be willing to watch and learn. So practicing meditation with an open mind, free from any hard and fast views about how you believe consciousness to be, but to relax into the moment, to allow experience to arise, allow an array of sounds, an array of thoughts, an array of tactile sensations, just observing those arising, and acknowledge that with the arising of any object, the moment of knowing arises with it. If that object were not to arise, that moment of knowing would not arise with it. So they arise in dependence upon one another. There undoubtedly has to be a material support for the arising of consciousness. But the need for consciousness to arise stems from past actions. And every link in Paticca Samuppada is available for observation. There isn't anything in this which is not available for mindful observation. So it's experience-led. So, so it's paying exquisite attention. You can come to find out the truth of things for yourself just through observation. And I'm saying this because the nature of consciousness is such a huge issue. People align their self with the fact of what they consider to be their conscious being, and that's fair enough. But if you truly want to transcend the whole wheel of samsara, if you truly want to understand how this is all being put together moment by moment, then you have to let go of the ferocity with which you hold the view that I am consciousness. And that will allow you then to see that consciousness is momentary, originated due to conditions, arising with an object only to cease, and through the repeated observation of that, the I am conceit is gradually worn away. So, yeah, till the next time.